Everyone in Cedar Square had learned how not to see him. The old man arrived before the shops opened, when the sun was already bright, but the day had not yet decided what it would become. He sat on the same bench, facing the courthouse steps, his walking stick resting between both hands as if it were part of him. People passed close enough to brush the dust from his shoes, yet their eyes slid away, trained by habit to look beyond his face. Children were pulled gently to the side. Adults quickened their pace. Some pretended to scroll through their phones. Others fixed their gaze on the road ahead, as though stopping might cost them something. The old man never asked for anything. That, strangely, made him easier to ignore. His name was Henry Caldwell, though no one here used it anymore. Names only mattered when people wanted to remember you. At exactly 9 minutes past 9, the courthouse bell rang. The sound carried cleanly across the square, sharp and familiar. Henry closed his eyes for the briefest moment. His fingers tightened around the polished wood of his stick, then relaxed again. Anyone watching closely might have noticed the breath he released, slow and careful, as if holding it too long might cause something inside him to break. No one watched closely. Across the square, traders arranged their goods. A woman argued with a customer over the price of tomatoes. A bus conductor shouted destinations with practiced rhythm. Life moved around Henry, loud and alive, while he remained still, like a forgotten photograph left in the sun. He did not come to beg. He did not come to sleep. He came to watch. The courthouse steps held his attention every morning. The chipped concrete, the wide doors, the faded emblem above them. Years earlier, those steps had carried different sounds. Laughter, hurried footsteps, children running too fast, voices calling his name with warmth. Now, they only echoed with the present. A young man brushed past him and muttered, "Sorry, Baba," without slowing. The apology came from habit, not thought. Henry nodded anyway. There was a time when people waited for him to speak. That memory sat quietly behind his eyes. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shortened. The square grew crowded. Henry stayed where he was, his posture patient, his face calm, carrying a history no one asked about. He wore a clean shirt, faded at the seams, and shoes repaired so carefully they almost looked proud of their scars. A woman across the square glanced at him, then looked away quickly, unsettled by a feeling she could not name. Somewhere inside her, a thought stirred and died before reaching words. Henry shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting his position so the light fell just right on the courthouse doors. He had learned long ago that timing mattered. Some truths only found their voice when the day was ready to listen. For now, silence was enough. The bell would ring again tomorrow, and he would be there to hear it. Long before the bench became his place, Henry Caldwell stood every morning at the front of classroom. The room was never quiet when he entered. Chalk dust floated in the air. Children talked over one another. Chairs scraped the floor. Yet the moment Henry raised his hand, not sharply, not demanding, the noise softened on its own. He had that effect on people back then. They listened because they felt safe doing so. He taught literature at Cedar Grove Secondary School. His lessons were never rushed. He believed stories were meant to be lived inside, not skimmed through. When students struggled, he stayed late. When parents could not afford books, he found a way. His desk drawer always held spare pens, spare paper, spare patience. On the wall behind him hung handwritten lines copied carefully from novels and poems. One line, written larger than the rest, faced his desk. Truth does not shout. It waits. He believed that with all his heart. Margaret used to tease him about it at night. She would sit on the edge of their bed, folding laundry, watching him grade papers long past midnight. "You trust people too much," she said once, not unkindly. Henry smiled without looking up. Children deserve that. Their son, Daniel, was 7 then. He often fell asleep at the kitchen table, head resting on his school bag, waiting for his father to finish. Henry would carry him to bed, careful not to wake him, whispering promises about fishing trips and football matches that sometimes came, sometimes didn't. Life was ordinary and good. The first crack appeared on an afternoon that seemed like any other. A student remained behind after class, lingering near the door long after everyone else had left. His name was Oliver. He was usually cheerful, quick to answer questions, quick to laugh. That day, he could not meet Henry's eyes. Henry waited. Oliver's words came slowly, uneven, filled with fear. He spoke about things no child should carry alone. Henry listened without interrupting, his chest tightening with every sentence. When the boy finished, Henry did not rush to comfort him with promises. He thanked him for trusting him. He told him he had done the right thing. That night, Henry reported what he heard, exactly as he was required to do. He did not tell Margaret everything, only that a student was in trouble. She noticed the way his hands shook when he set his cup down, the way he stared at nothing long after the lights were off. Days passed, then weeks. Questions began quietly. A call from the principal. A meeting requested for clarity. Parents stopped greeting him at the gate. Conversations paused when he entered rooms. The school board asked him to step aside while they looked into things. He complied. He trusted the process. He still believed truth waited. The newspaper story came before the investigation ended. His name appeared in print beside words carefully chosen to avoid blame, yet heavy enough to sink a man's reputation. Neighbors stopped waving. Daniel came home from school silent, eyes lowered. Margaret stopped folding laundry. By the time the official findings cleared him, the damage had already learned how to live without facts. Henry packed his classroom alone, running his fingers over the chalkboard one last time. The quote on the wall stared back at him. Truth does not shout. It waits. For the first time, Henry did not leave Cedar Grove. Many thought he should have. Some expected it. A few even advised it in lowered voices, as though distance might clean what silence had stained. But Henry stayed, not out of stubborn pride, but because leaving felt like agreement. As long as he remained, he believed the truth still had a place to stand. Margaret tried to make their home feel the same. She kept the curtains open, continued greeting neighbors, continued attending church. Yet the warmth she once carried began to thin. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Friends became polite strangers. Invitations faded quietly. At night, she lay awake beside Henry, staring at the ceiling. They don't ask, she said once. They don't want to hear. Henry reached for her hand. They will. One day, she did not answer. Daniel felt the change in sharper ways. Children repeated what they heard at home. Words followed him through school corridors, whispered but clear enough to cut. He stopped talking about becoming a teacher like his father. He stopped bringing friends home. One evening, Henry found him sitting on the back steps, school bag untouched. Do you believe me? Daniel asked without looking up. The question hollowed Henry's chest. Yes, he said. Always. Daniel nodded, but belief alone could not shield him from the weight of other people's doubt. When the official letter arrived clearing Henry of any wrongdoing, it came quietly. No apology. No meeting to correct the record. Just a sealed envelope that confirmed what Henry had known from the beginning. Margaret read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. That's it? She asked. For them, Henry said. For her, it was not enough. Her health began to fail soon after. At first, it was small things, fatigue, missteps, a cough that lingered too long. Henry noticed everything, even when she tried to hide it. Hospital visits became frequent. Bills stacked up. Daniel took a job after school. Margaret apologized often in those months for resting too much, for costing too much, for not being strong enough. Henry never corrected her with words. He showed her instead, sitting beside her bed, reading aloud, holding her hand until sleep came. She died on a quiet morning, the sun already bright through the hospital window. Her last look held both love and regret, neither spoken. After the funeral, Daniel packed a bag. I can't breathe here, he said. Henry understood. He hugged his son longer than necessary, memorizing the feel of him, the weight of what was leaving. I'll call, Daniel promised. He did at first, then less often, then not at all. Henry sold the house and moved into a small room near the square. He kept few things. Books, a photograph of Margaret, the letter clearing his name. Every morning, he walked to the courthouse bench. Staying had cost him nearly everything. Yet he stayed, because somewhere inside him, a voice still waited to be heard. Emily Harper did not intend to notice the old man. She arrived in Cedar Grove, chasing a different story, one her editor described as simple and profitable. A redevelopment plan threatened to erase the old courthouse, replacing it with glass apartments and retail space. Emily was told to gather reactions, add local color, and move on. She had learned, in bigger cities, how to see past people without meaning to. Schedules did that to you. On her third morning, she crossed the square distracted, reviewing notes on her phone, when her foot caught an uneven stone. She stumbled forward, bracing for the sharp embarrassment of falling in public. A hand steadied her arm. "Careful," a man said. His voice was calm, measured, older than it looked. Emily straightened and turned, surprised to see the old man from the bench standing beside her, his walking stick tucked under one arm, his other hand steady and sure. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. They were clear, watchful, not empty, as she had somehow assumed. "You're welcome," he replied, then returned to his bench without another word. That should have been the end of it. But something about the way he moved, slow but deliberate, stayed with her. The way he looked at the courthouse doors, not like a stranger, but like someone waiting for an answer. The next day, she sat beside him. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. He glanced at the empty space, then back at her, only by memory. She smiled, unsure what he meant, and introduced herself. He gave only his first name. They spoke about small things at first. The heat, the noise of the square, how Cedar Grove felt smaller than it looked on maps. Henry asked about her work without prying. Emily noticed how carefully he listened, how he never interrupted. At 9 minutes past 9, the bell rang. Henry's fingers tightened briefly around his stick. "You don't like that sound," Emily said. He considered her for a moment, then answered, "Some sounds arrive before their reasons." It was not a story. It was a doorway. Over the next few days, Emily found herself drawn back to the bench, even when her work took her elsewhere. She noticed how others avoided sitting near him, how conversations lowered as they passed, how he never reacted. One afternoon, she asked the question people usually avoided. "Why do you come here every day?" Henry looked at the courthouse, sunlight catching the worn lines of his face. "Because this is where my voice stopped," he said, "and where it might start again." Emily felt a shift then, the kind that told her this was not background color. This was the story. That evening, instead of writing about redevelopment plans, she went to the local archives and found his face staring back at her from years ago. The archives smelled of paper, dust, and forgotten days. Emily ran her fingers along shelves stacked with yellowed newspapers, past town council reports, old event programs. The building itself seemed to hold its breath, as though every document inside waited for someone willing to listen. She paused when she saw a photograph tucked between two issues of the Cedar Grove Gazette from decades earlier. There he was, Henry Caldwell, younger but unmistakable, standing in front of a classroom chalkboard, chalk dust clinging to his sleeves, eyes bright with conviction. The caption was careful, almost neutral. Local teacher involved in investigation regarding student welfare. No charges filed. Emily's pulse quickened. There was nothing about his exoneration in the headline, only a trail of insinuation, enough to ruin a reputation. Further down, buried on page 6, a small paragraph confirmed that the original complaint had been withdrawn and no wrongdoing was found. But the words were weak. No apology. No recognition of what he had endured. A quiet erasure. The photographs brought more questions than answers. Some showed Henry walking through the square, always alone. Some captured him helping students, handing books, listening intently. The consistency struck her. This was a man who had dedicated himself entirely to others, yet the town had turned its back. She remembered how he had spoken about some sounds arriving before their reasons. This phrase no longer felt abstract. Every glance, every subtle interaction she had witnessed, the way people avoided him, the avoidance that clung like a shadow, made sense. Emily needed to see if the story went further. She found old letters, carefully preserved, sent to the school board after the investigation. One letter was from Oliver, the student who had started it all. Written years later, the words were humble and filled with gratitude. You believed me when no one else did. It read. I owe so much to the way you listened. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. The boy, now a man, had been safe because of him. And still, no one remembered. She dug even deeper. Margaret Caldwell's name appeared in hospital records and obituaries. The sorrow in Henry's quiet face now had context. He had stayed while the people around him drifted away. Daniel had left. Margaret had passed. The losses piled quietly behind his calm exterior, each a reason why he might have been better off leaving. Yet he remained steadfast. Emily finally understood the weight of his patience, his resilience, and his silence. Every day on the bench, every unacknowledged act was a testament. The story she thought she would write about a courthouse redevelopment had transformed into a human chronicle, a narrative of neglect, endurance, and eventual recognition. Her editor had asked for local color. Instead, she had found truth. A man ignored by a town until the story inside him demanded to be told. She could almost hear the bell at 9 minutes past 9, a signal that waiting did not diminish the power of what was held within. Emily left the archive, clutching the stack of papers, ready to meet Henry the next morning. The story she would tell needed more than photographs and dates. It required witnessing, presence, and the chance to finally let the town see him as he had always deserved, with dignity, courage, and depth. The town meeting hall was crowded, voices bouncing off the aged walls. Discussions about replacing the old courthouse with glass apartments had grown heated, emotions running high. Arguments over finances, permits, and progress drowned out any thought of history, of people, of memory. Emily sat near the back, notes in hand, heart pounding. Not for the redevelopment plan, but for the man she had come to know. Henry sat quietly in the corner. The murmurs of the crowd barely touched him. He wore the same worn shirt and trousers, polished shoes carrying decades of untold stories. Walking stick resting against his knee, he scanned the room with a calm precision that few noticed. Council members argued over space and cost. Residents shouted, waving papers, demanding logic. Amid the chaos, Emily caught the faintest tightening of Henry's fingers around the stick. He was ready. When the heated debate paused, Henry rose. Slowly, deliberately, each step measured and grounded. The room fell silent. Not instantly, but gradually, curiosity pulling attention toward the elderly man who had been invisible for so long. I taught children here, he said. His voice, calm yet resonant, carried across the room. I learned who I was here. I lost who I was here. And yet I waited. Murmurs spread. Faces turned, expressions morphing from irritation to surprise. Some people recognized him immediately. Others did not, until something deep within stirred. Familiarity, memory, guilt, shame. Emily noticed small reactions. A woman dabbed at her eyes, embarrassed by tears. A man froze, hands on the podium, stunned. Another woman leaned forward, unable to look away. Each reaction had layers, years of avoidance surfacing at once. Henry continued, recounting events without anger, without accusation. He spoke of Oliver's trust, the report he made, the absence of apology, Margaret's decline, Daniel's departure. Every word layered with quiet power. Every sentence pulled the town closer, yet also forced them to confront the silence they had maintained. A few people whispered to neighbors, asking questions they had never dared to voice. Others clenched their fists in regret, their gaze dropping to the floor. Emily scribbled furiously, capturing the room's transformation. Henry paused, letting the weight of his story settle. No one interrupted. No one attempted to argue. In the quiet, the truth had room to breathe. And in that moment, decades of neglect became visible, tangible, impossible to ignore. Finally, a woman stood. Her voice cracked as she apologized, not just for herself, but for years of collective inattention. One by one, more followed. Words spilled from mouths that had been silent too long. Recognition, sorrow, and remorse intertwined into a raw human chorus. Emily's pen stilled. This was not a story of redevelopment. This was a story of humanity, of what it meant to ignore truth and resilience for decades. And here it was unfolding, real and unfiltered, in front of her eyes. Henry returned to his seat, leaning on his stick, his expression serene. He did not gloat. He did not demand celebration. He simply existed in the presence of the acknowledgement that had been denied to him for so long. The bell in his mind rang at 9 minutes past 9. Only now, the sound was sweet. The square was quiet the next morning, brighter than it had been in years. Cedar Grove felt different, though no one could yet name why. Windows reflected the early sunlight, highlighting dust motes dancing lazily in the air. Shops opened, children ran, and the familiar hum of daily life resumed. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Henry returned to his bench, walking stick in hand, posture steady despite decades of wear. He sat and folded his hands, facing the courthouse steps. For the first time in years, the passers-by lingered just a little longer. Eyes met his. Some hesitated, some smiled, some whispered greetings. Recognition no longer carried shame. It carried understanding. Emily appeared shortly after, carrying her notebook and a stack of archived documents. She waved briefly, then joined him on the bench. They sat together silently for a few moments, letting the morning light warm their shoulders. No words were needed. The crowd from the meeting dispersed slowly, but its ripple reached others. Townspeople who had never attended council meetings began to speak to Henry. Children approached him, curious and unafraid. A teacher from a nearby school brought a stack of books, placing them carefully beside him. Others offered small gestures, a nod, a wave, a simple good morning, simple acts that had been denied for decades. Emily opened her notebook and began writing, though not in haste this time. Her pen moved with purpose, capturing the subtle changes. The way Henry's eyes crinkled as he acknowledged greetings, the cautious smiles, the gentle bowing of heads. Each detail told a story of redemption, of recognition earned not through apology, but through patient perseverance. Henry spoke softly, recounting small moments to Emily. The story of Oliver's letter, Margaret's final days, Daniel's departure, the quiet acts of teaching that had gone unnoticed. Each anecdote resonated with life, carrying the weight of years spent waiting for acknowledgement. The sun climbed higher, and the square became alive with vivid color. Merchants arranging vibrant produce, children running in brightly colored uniforms, sunlight catching the edges of metal rooftops. Everything felt sharper, brighter, as if the act of seeing Henry had enhanced their perception of the town itself. A young boy approached, carrying a notebook. "Sir, may I learn from you?" he asked. His voice was tentative but earnest. Henry's lips curved in the faintest smile, and he nodded. Emily wrote furiously, capturing the scene. The transmission of knowledge, the bridging of generations, the subtle power of patience rewarded. As the morning settled, Henry leaned back on the bench, eyes tracing the familiar architecture. The courthouse no longer seemed like a place of neglect. It felt alive again, a symbol of resilience and enduring truth. People passed, glanced, and some stopped, a quiet reverence in their gestures. Emily closed her notebook, satisfied. She had what she needed, but she realized it was more than a story for publication. It was a testimony of human endurance, of a life lived with integrity, and the quiet power of a man who had been invisible until his story demanded to be heard. Henry exhaled slowly, a subtle sense of relief washing over him. The bell in his mind rang softly, not as a signal of waiting, but as a chime of acknowledgement finally received. Weeks passed, yet the change in Cedar Grove remained. The courthouse steps, once a symbol of indifference, had become a place of quiet reverence. Henry returned to his bench each morning, though now people approached him openly. Children ran to him, asking questions. Adults paused to greet him or ask for advice. The town had learned, finally, the weight of its neglect and the depth of his patience. Emily's article was published. She had written carefully, letting the narrative unfold without sensationalism, giving Cedar Grove a chance to see Henry as he truly was. The piece drew attention, But more importantly, it drew understanding. Letters arrived from former students, from parents, from people who had once looked past him without thought. Gratitude and acknowledgement poured in, some too late for Margaret to see, some in time for Daniel to reconnect. Henry's eyes, once tired, now held a soft light. He spoke less, listened more, but his presence carried authority without demand. His story had become a bridge, connecting a town to its overlooked history, to the people they had failed to notice, and to the children who now carried his lessons forward. One afternoon, Daniel returned. He approached the courthouse steps slowly, uncertain, hesitant. Henry saw him before he was seen, a flicker of recognition crossing his lined face. No words were needed. The embrace spoke volumes of forgiveness, understanding, and a bond that endured despite absence. Margaret's photograph, once the only companion of quiet mornings, remained on the bench beside him, now framed by flowers placed there by students who had grown up hearing his story. The town had learned to see what they had ignored for decades, and the act of seeing brought healing not just to Henry, but to everyone around him. Even the courthouse, slated for redevelopment, remained. Instead of glass and steel, it became a center for learning and remembrance. A plaque was placed at the entrance, simple yet profound. Truth does not shout. It waits. Henry sat on his bench each morning, as he always had, but now his eyes scanned faces that recognized him, that welcomed his presence. Children played at his feet. Adults nodded in respect. The sunlight caught the lines of his face, now carrying not just history, but validation, a quiet dignity hard-earned. Emily visited frequently, sometimes silently watching, sometimes recording snippets of conversation, her role now a witness to ongoing history rather than a reporter capturing it from afar. She saw the difference a single life could make when patience met acknowledgement. As the sun set over Cedar Grove, Henry leaned back, walking stick across his knees, eyes tracing the familiar courthouse steps. The bell in his mind chimed softly, echoing the rhythm of a town learning to see. He had waited decades, endured loss, and remained steadfast. And now, at last, the story he carried, the story everyone had once ignored, had transformed not just his life, but the life of the entire town. The bench remained, the courthouse remained, and Henry Caldwell, the old man everyone ignored until his story brought them to tears, finally rested in the quiet power of recognition.